The archaeological site on Theta Z7 had been frozen in time for 3,000 years. Dr. Kanat, a Vrel xenolinguist with scales that shimmered like copper in the dim light of the excavation chamber, had spent the last 6 months attempting to decipher the symbols carved into the obsidian obelisk. Every known linguistic pattern had failed. Every translation algorithm had returned errors. The language matched nothing in the galactic archives. No living species, no extinct civilization, nothing. It was as if the universe itself had forgotten who wrote these words. Kanat's 4 eyes narrowed as he traced his clawed finger over the intricate glyphs. They were beautiful, flowing like water frozen midstream but utterly incomprehensible. His mandibles clicked in frustration. The Vrel were considered the finest linguists in the known galaxy, yet this dead language mocked him. "Dr. Kanat?" A voice called from the entrance. He turned to see Akeem, the human consultant the council had insisted on bringing aboard. She was young by human standards, barely into her 3rd decade, with dark skin and eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Her hair was pulled back in what humans called a braid, and she carried a worn leather journal tucked under one arm. Kanat had protested her assignment initially. Humans were newcomers to the galactic stage. Impulsive, short-lived, and lacking the millennia of linguistic study his people possessed. What could she possibly contribute? "The preliminary scans are complete," Akeem said, stepping into the chamber. She moved with that peculiar human grace, somehow both cautious and confident. "Mind if I take a look?" Kanat gestured toward the obelisk with a resigned wave of his primary arm. "Be my guest. Though I warn you, this language has resisted every analytical method we possess." Akeem approached the monument, her boots echoing softly against the ancient stone floor. She stood before it in silence, her head tilted slightly, lips moving as if in silent conversation with the symbols themselves. Then she did something that made Kanat's scales bristle with confusion. She opened her journal. The pages were filled with handwritten notes, an archaic human practice that Kanat found charmingly primitive. She flipped through them with practiced ease, her fingers dancing across paper that seemed impossibly fragile compared to the Duraplast datapads everyone else used. "Page 6, Akeem said softly. The words were barely a whisper, yet they seemed to reverberate through the chamber. Kanat's translator implant stuttered, catching on something. A harmonic, a pattern, a ghost of meaning that shouldn't exist. "What did you say?" he demanded. Akeem looked up from her journal, and for the first time since arriving, she smiled. "Page 6. That's what this says." She pointed to a cluster of symbols at the base of the obelisk. "And that one says Chapter 3. And this." She traced her finger upward. "This is a table of contents." Kanat felt his respiratory vents constrict. "Impossible. We've analyzed—" "You've been treating it like a language," Akeem interrupted gently. "It's not. Well, it is, but not the way you think." She turned back to the obelisk, running her hand along its surface with something approaching reverence. "This isn't a monument or a warning or a territorial marker. It's a library catalog." "A catalog?" Kanat moved closer, his scientific curiosity overwhelming his skepticism. "In a language that matches no known species?" "Because it's not meant to match one species," Akeem explained. "Look at the structure. The symbols aren't arbitrary, they're referential. Each glyph is a pointer, a citation to something else. This civilization didn't create a language to communicate. They created one to organize." She opened her journal wider, showing Kanat pages filled with diagrams and notations. "Humans have been doing this for thousands of years. Before we had digital systems, before we had computers, we had to create systems to catalog information. Library classification systems like Dewey Decimal, archival reference codes, bibliographic notation. We needed ways to point to knowledge without containing it." Kanat stared at the journal, then at the obelisk, his mind racing. "You're saying this entire structure is an index?" "An index to a library we haven't found yet," Akeem confirmed. She pointed to different sections of the obelisk. "These symbols here? Coordinates. These? Subject classifications. And these?" She touched a flowing sequence near the top. "Author attributions." Kanat's mandibles hung open. In 6 months, his entire team had failed to recognize what this human saw in minutes. "But why did humans develop such systems when you barely had space travel?" Akim's smile turned wistful. "Because we're obsessed with preservation. We've always known we're short-lived, Dr. Kanat. A human life is maybe a century if we're lucky, so we write everything down. We catalog, we reference, we cross-index. We build systems so that our knowledge outlives us. She tapped her journal. This thing is 3 years old and falling apart, but the notes inside will help me remember what I might forget. It's very human. The Vrel scientist felt something shift in his understanding. The galaxy had always viewed humanity's record-keeping obsession as quaint, unnecessary in an age of perfect digital storage. But here, in this ancient chamber, that very obsession had unlocked a mystery that advanced technology could not. So where is the library? Kanat asked, his voice hushed with awe. Akim consulted her journal again, comparing her notes to the symbols. Her eyes lit up. If I'm reading this correctly, beneath us, about 2 kilometers down. Kanat immediately activated his communicator, calling for deep penetration scanners. As the equipment was being prepared, he turned to Akim, his earlier prejudice dissolving like morning frost. I owe you an apology, he said. I thought humans too young to contribute. Akim closed her journal carefully, running her hand over its worn cover. We might be young, Dr. Kanat, but we've always understood that knowledge is fragile. That's why we treat it like treasure. When the scanners confirmed a massive structure buried beneath the obelisk, a repository that dwarfed anything in the known galaxy, Kanat realized something profound. The universe hadn't forgotten who built this place. It had simply been waiting for someone who understood the value of remembering.